everyone, and welcome to our week 3 in our Dear Church series. We are so happy that you decided to join Jacob and I as we just dive a little bit deeper into the church of Pergamum. There's a lot to unpack there, so we're really excited just to get to dive just a tinge deeper than what we got to hear in the sermon today.
Yeah.
And so we're just going to get right into
Let's
it.
do it.
Let's do it.
Thanks for having me.
Gosh, you are so welcome.
This is great. I'm so excited to be here.
We're on a live studio audience with.
I love it.
Okay, so tonight you really talked a lot about being holy and turning our focus to Jesus.
Sure.
But what are some ways that we can turn our focus on Jesus, but not turning it into like do's and don'ts list? I don't know about anybody else, but I love lists. Like I really thrive on a list system. But what are some ways that we can still focus on Jesus and not turn it into those lists?
Yeah, that's good. I think the way I've been explaining it actually to like other people would be think about your marriage or like a relationship in your life. And so when I think about my wife, Danielle, right? Like when I think about being a great husband and living a great husband life, I don't have a list of things that I'm like, okay, I need to do this and do this and do this and do this and do this. I just love Danielle. And I'm just like, all right, what can I do today that's gonna just like make me love her more, or like what's gonna honor her in those ways. And so there's days where I wake up and it's not like I'm like, okay, today I gotta wash the dishes, but I'll walk out and I'm like, man, you know what? Danielle would like, it would make her happy. It would honor her if I wash the dishes right now. And so I focus on her, and then just all of a sudden actions pop up everywhere. I don't make it be like, okay, if I don't do this, I do this, like I'm not gonna love her as much. It's just every day I'm like, okay, I'm gonna focus on Danielle. What can I do to love her better? And then boom, it happens. I'm sure you've experienced this.
I have, yes.
You're a mom, you're a wife, like you've experienced this in your life, totally.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. Because then when I think about that, I think of my son Kellen.
Yes.
And how like different things at school will happen, and I'm like, I just want him to do well and to, be thriving.
Honestly, like when you do that, so many of that checklist stuff, you don't even think about it.
No, it's not a checklist anymore.
It goes away. I mean, it goes back. I made that example about the fences and the wells, right? Like human psychology is a big deal within that. Like when you're into a room, you'll see people love to spread out to the walls. And so like, even if you'll notice this, you'll start to notice this and stuff, okay? Even if you have like a big row, like a room of chairs, people love to be in the back row. They don't love to be in the front. It's just weird human psychology. And so when you put those wells in the middle of those fields, the cows just are drawn to what gives them life. And it's almost like the fences just disappear. And the same way, when I focus on Danielle, or when I focus on Jesus, it's like those rules almost disappear because I'm like, man, I'm not focused on what to do, what not to. I'm just focused on Jesus, and all that stuff's just gonna come up as an overflow. Does that vibe? You make sense? Okay.
Yes, that makes so much sense.
Good.
And speaking of focusing on Jesus and all that, you really touched a lot tonight on, well, I shouldn't say a lot, but there was a touch there.
Just a little bit.
On the fact that Pergamum really worshipped a lot of gods.
Oh, man.
Oh, my gosh.
Do you want to hear something crazy about Pergamum?
I really do, actually.
Okay, so they had this god. His name's Asclepius. And
that is such a fun name.
I know. It's really weird looking, too.
Say it 5 times fast.
I can't. And it starts with an A too. It's like not what you'd expect at all. So he was the god of medicine. And actually, you've probably seen him before because have you seen like the cross with the snake around it?
Yes.
That's like his sign, Asclepius. And so there was this temple in Pergamum, super weird. And you would go there and it was completely dark and there was all these non-venomous snakes that just lived in the temple. And so if you were sick, you would go into Asclepius's temple and just lay there. And overnight, if a snake touched you, you were supposed to be healed. Isn't that like the most jacked up?
Absolutely not.
He's like, no, people say that's the reason he said Satan's throne because it was like snake based. They're like, man, there's a snake. Like he was super, I don't know. I'm not about that. I ain't doing that.
I mean, I would rather do a lot of other things than lay on the ground with snakes.
Oh yeah, that's not doing it. So anyways, that just tells you how much of like
it was
weird.
Bad.
Oh, it was horrible.
It was so bad.
Horrible.
But even what's the worst part then about that is that this was normal for them.
Oh yeah. Oh,
like,
absolutely.
Oh, we just worship all these gods and it's no big deal.
Yep.
So then my question today is, if back then, right, they didn't realize like, oh, this is just normal. This is just what we do. So what do you think in our culture that we just do today that we don't realize is unintentionally worshiping other gods?
That's good. I think you have to get down to like worship. So worship, we always say, oh, I'm not worshiping anything else because I'm not like joining with hundreds of other people and singing songs, right?
You're not worshiping the golden calf over there.
Right. Like, it's not like we're like, all right, oh, holy iPhone. We're not doing that.
Holy iPhone.
But when you think about like worship as your mind's attention and your heart's affection, it changes what you think you worship. And so what is taking your mind's attention and your heart's affection away from God at different times? What's taking the place as the biggest thing in your life? And so social media is a huge one that people worship.
Yes.
I mean, people, just like famous figures, whether it be like an athlete or a politician or movie star, like people worship that stuff. Their phones is a big thing that people, I mean, it's crazy to think of the things that take our trust and our hope away from God. Because when you say the phrase, I'm not worshiping an idol, like you don't think about worshiping as an idol unless you're like singing to it or like bowing down to it, but really our lives are what shows us what we worship. And so I would say, like, for me, one that can be an issue is sports. Like, isn't that weird to think about? Like, I can like worship sports, but man, do I love some college sports. I love some NBA in my life.
Oh, I know.
And there's times where I'm like, it sounds so bad, but like, if there's an opportunity to read my Bible in the day or watch a game, sometimes I'll sacrifice reading my Bible for 15 minutes, but I'm like, I'll make all the time in the world to watch this Louisville game. And that's bad. That's all my, that is not okay to do. Yeah.
You should come over to our house sometime and.
Oh, thanks for inviting me. That's great.
Because literally, oh my gosh, sports are always on.
Yeah.
Always. It doesn't matter what's going on.
Yeah.
We love sports, so
There's just, worship is, idols are a weird, scary thing that
they are.
we need to be aware of more than anything.
And I also think, as you were talking, I thought about how there's this huge, I don't want to say pandemic or epidemic or whatever, but
go for it.
That's kind of what it is.
Common phrase right now.
Yeah. Where we're just constantly comparing ourselves because we just keep scrolling and we're like, well, I'm not having as much fun as that person. But because you keep scrolling, it's like, what's your heart really thinking about right now?
Yeah.
Like, what are you really focused on? Are you focused on Jesus, or are you focused on what this other person is doing that you don't even know?
Yeah. Romans would talk about it as idolatry is when you're looking to something created that can only give you what the creator can. And so it's when you're looking for social media to give you your identity or your worth. It's when you're looking at, I don't know, like something to give you your security or your faith or your hope. And it's like, really? Yeah. I mean, so like only Jesus can give us all those things. Only Jesus can say, hey, your hope, your identity, your faith can be found in me. But sometimes we're like, well, but what if I have hope in like this person because they're doing this for me? And that's an idol. When we trade the truth about God and we trade it for a lie, that's when idolatry really happens too.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's scary.
It is.
It's
it really
real.
is. It's sneaky.
Yeah.
That's what Satan is. He is.
Oh, you're not joking.
He is sneaky. Well, speaking of Satan, he was really brought up a lot. He's mentioned a lot in the verse, but
sure is.
Like I said at the beginning, there was so much to unpack there, and I'm certain you did not get to talk about everything you wanted to.
True.
So is there anything that you didn't get to cover tonight that you really, really wish you could have touched on?
Man, that's a good question. One of the biggest ways I wanted to break this down was talking about people who say things and people who do things. And I kind of decided to go a different direction, but there's something about, and I think we all know those people. There's people who they talk a big game, right? Yes. And I talked about this just a little bit, but I really wanted to hammer it down. Like, they'll be like, man, I'm gonna do this and I can say this. But then there's people who back it up with their actions. And I think there comes a point when, as followers of Jesus, we can say things, but we have to just start doing things. Mm-hmm. And I hammered on man, God makes us holy and we've been called to be holy. But before we're called to be holy, he just called us holy. But then you have to live within that. And so there's times where you can say, I'm holy, I did it. But then you have to back it up with your actions in a big way. And I really want to hit more on that. But I think the bigger thing that we can do as a church, anytime, this is good, I think, just to talk about, anytime we come to a church service, I pray that before we think about it changing our whole lives, it just changes our week. And then every week we come to church, we see that slow drip and it changes our lives over a long time. Yes. And so this weekend, I just figured the best thing we can do is say, man, you just got to change your focus. It's a small thing. For some people in the room, they're not going to change their focus at all. If anything, they're just going to make it a little sharper. Okay, this is what you. But for some people, they got to buy a whole new camera. They're walking in I didn't even know we were supposed to look. What do you mean look at Jesus? Am I supposed to buy binoculars right now? And I think starting there and saying, if you just shift your focus to Jesus, let's just work on that this week. that's just a good, better place to start than kind of hammering the say things and do things.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah.
And I love that, focusing on where your heart's at and not where your actions are.
Yeah, that word repent means a lot.
It
and
does.
so I've definitely, that's something, definitely talk about that in groups tonight. I mean, that's a big deal.
Yep, it is. I totally agree.
Well, thank you.
You're so welcome. Thanks for being with us tonight.
I loved it. If you feel free to have me back, you talk to my people, they can talk.
Perfect. I'll have my people call your people.
I don't have people, so you just call me.
I'll call Danielle.
Yeah, perfect.
Well, thank you all so much for being with us tonight. I hope you have a great group session, and please let us know if you've got any questions.